If you have not been on social media or you're not watching corporate media, you may not be aware of this, but Bernie Sanders is doing an anti-oligarchy tour across the United States. Now, I agree with fighting back against the billionaires, the oligarchs, etc. But what Bernie Sanders is leaving out with this tour is that it's not just the Republican Party that is in bed with billionaires. It's also the Democratic Party as well, which Bernie knows that. With this tour, he is going to districts that Republicans won by a small margin, with hopes that those districts can be flipped back to the Democratic Party, which again defeats the purpose of fighting against the oligarchs, because the Democratic Party is also connected to Wall Street, is also connected to billionaires and billionaire donors. Don't forget that Bernie Sanders endorsed Kamala Harris, who was taking a lot of money from billionaires and who bragged about getting endorsement from Goldman Sachs. So let's just all keep that in mind. AOC has decided to join him on this tour. And one of the things I noticed is that corporate media is covering this tour. Let's go ahead and jump in with this clip here. Shout out to Hotspot for this. Listen to what happened here in Arizona with AOC and Bernie. Check this out.
The crowd just absolutely adored this progressive pair. There were Bernie Sanders t-shirts everywhere and even AOC 2028 pins. And the reason is because the base right now is furious with the Democratic leadership in Washington for not standing up aggressively enough to President Donald Trump. But AOC and Sanders are not backing away from the fight. In fact, they are embracing it. That is a huge reason why are they putting on this tour in the first place. And AOC even had some sharp words for her own party. Take a listen.
This isn't just about Republicans either. We need a Democratic Party that fights harder for us too. That's one thing I love about Arizonans, is that you all have shown that if a U.S. Senator isn't fighting hard enough for you, you're not afraid to replace her with one who will.
Now, AOC didn't mention any Democratic leaders by name, but the crowd in Las Vegas yesterday certainly did. They broke out into multiple chants of Primary Chuck, a reference to Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who's been under fire from his own party after last week's government funding fight. Now, advisors to AOC insist she's not plotting a primary, she's not planning to run for president, but they also aren't ruling it out either, Anna.
Okay, so apparently they had a big crowd there in Arizona. The other night, they were posting pictures about that particular event, and people were saying that AOC gave a very powerful speech, right? But this goes back to what I've been saying for quite some time, actually, since I started the show, which is that they seem to really want to come out and try to fight back against the billionaire class when the Republicans are in power. But when Kamala Harris was taking money from that same billionaire class, it was AOC and Bernie Sanders who endorsed her and told you to support this same oligarchy that they're supposed to be fighting back against. And that's where my criticism comes from, that you're not fighting back against the oligarchy if you're still supporting these people that are taking billionaire money. So that's something to keep in mind there. There's something else. This rally in Arizona, and I understand the strategy, right? Go to these districts that Republicans barely won, that maybe can flip back blue. I get that. But I've been noticing something about the places that they're going to, right? Let's say you keep that strategy. But what about the strategy of going to communities that the Democratic Party actually needs in order to win? That's what they're not doing. Case in point, this individual pointed this out, and I thought they had a really good point here. Mr. Weeks said, all those white people, again, for the newbies, no shade to white people. Sabby loves everybody. But I think the point that Mr. Weeks is trying to make is that unlike the Republican Party, the Democratic Party cannot win without the black vote. And considering that Kamala Harris lost the black vote in 2024, you would think the priority would be to go to black communities in order to help the Democratic Party actually win. But that's not what they're doing. In fact, if you look at this picture, this is coming from Jeremy Slevin, quite the crowd for Bernie Sanders and AOC in Tempe. And I've looked at a number of these pictures online from Arizona. I couldn't spot one black person in the crowd, you know? And Tempe, from what I understand with demographics, there aren't as many black people there. I get it. I understand that. But what I'm saying is they're not prioritizing the very base that they need in order to win. Black voters have been leaving the Democratic Party, or at least not participating in the presidential election. They have been sitting on the couch or voting third party or whatever. But most of us have been sitting on the couch since Barack Obama's last presidency in 2012. Barack Obama till this day still has the highest turnout from black voters. It has continued to decrease since that. People didn't want to say it in 2016, but Hillary Clinton lost the black vote. Joe Biden was able to win back a portion of the black vote because of that endorsement from Jim Clyburn. And a lot of people don't want to admit this, but Jim Clyburn endorsing Joe Biden, I was about to say Bernie, Jim Clyburn endorsing Joe Biden in South Carolina, that did turn around things for Joe Biden in that race because he hadn't won any of those primary states. And having lived in South Carolina, I can tell you from experience that for whatever crazy reason, a lot of people, particularly older black voters, still like Jim Clyburn and listen to what he says. It's the oldest electorate, you guys. So that really did make a difference for Joe Biden. I look back on it and I wonder, without that endorsement from Clyburn, does Biden go on to win that primary? I don't know. I really don't. And then there's some who told me to my face that they were going to vote for Joe Biden because he was Barack Obama's VP. No tangibles, no policies, no nothing. He was friends with the black guy. So I'm just going to go ahead and support him. As a community, we really have to have deeper conversations about just giving our vote away and not getting anything in return. But the reason why I bring this up is this. This was a problem for Bernie in 2016. This was an issue for Bernie in 2020. While he did especially well with Latino voters, remember, he went to those communities where the Latino voters were. Now, I know he's not running for president, but the reality is the Democratic Party can't win without the black vote. While he was able to win over younger black voters, Bernie Sanders struggled with the older black voters, and they are the ones who are more likely to come out and vote. So why is he making these same mistakes again? In fact, someone even commented and they said something here, Summer Malo. I don't get why Bernie hasn't even tried to give the black community a seat at his table. Does he really think ignoring the backbone of our base will lead to anything good? And I think Summer has a really good point there, right? Like, what is this all? What is he doing? Like, what? Like what is happening here? LPA Film says Black American voters and that 30% of left anti-genocide voters sat our asses home or voted third party will do the same. Yeah, and that's the thing. And they don't want to admit that. And by they, I mean corporate media, I mean the Democrat strategists. They don't want to admit that, yes, Kamala lost the black vote just like Hillary lost the black vote. It wasn't just the Latino voters. And now there's something else that Bernie Sanders is adding to these rallies. This is new. So brace yourselves. Now Bernie Sanders is proposing that they are trying to create another party within the Democratic Party, which is basically what Justice Democrats was. Like, I was just so confused, right? But now adding to that, he is saying that you don't have to run through the Democratic Party. What? I know, right? Now he's saying you don't have to run through the Democratic Party. Let's get into this. And I'm going to tell you what this is really about, because people have to read between the lines. Watch what he says, though. Bernie Sanders has an idea for the left. Don't run as Democrats. Okay. So you see what he's saying now? Don't run as Democrats. Listen to this. I'm pretty sure people are already laughing in the chat. Senator Bernie Sanders has a message for his fellow progressives. Why don't you shed the Democratic label and run as an independent the way he does? Mr. Sanders, listen to this. He came in an interview with the New York Times, and he went on to say One of the aspects of this tour is to try to rally people to engage in the political process and run as independents outside of the Democratic Party. There's a lot of great leadership all over this country at the grassroots level. We've got to bring that forward. And if we do that, we can defeat Trumpism and we can transform the political situation in America. Hold up. Hold the phone. Because I'm sitting here and I'm waiting like this, because I'm sitting back and I'm thinking, okay, all the people who smeared me and RBN and Heartland's Media and Due Dissidents and all of us that were saying, okay, run outside of the party for years, who still support Bernie Sanders, are they going to smear Bernie like they smeared me? Or are they just going to go along with it now because Bernie said it? You know how flustered this made me, ladies and gentlemen. Do you know how flustered I became over this? Because I'm like, oh, okay, now it's okay to say it. What have I been telling you guys? Outside of the party, because Justice Democrats showed us that the Democrat leadership is not going to let them have this hostile takeover of the Democratic Party. And if they try to push back, they're going to make sure that they lose their seat. That's what happened to Cori Bush, and that's what happened to Jamal Bowman. And before them, it happened to Dennis Kucinich. That's right. Once upon a time, Dennis Kucinich was the progressive that was in Congress. And you know how they got rid of him? They redrew his district. His own party did that. So now Bernie is telling people to run outside of the Democratic Party as an independent, not just in the Democratic Party, but also outside of the Democratic Party as an independent, like he did, like Angus King did as well. So I'm waiting. My DMs are open. My email is present in public. I'm waiting for the people, all these people who smeared me, who called me names, who called me right wing. Are they going to call Bernie Sanders right wing for saying the same thing that I've been saying for years? But there's a catch to this, because there's something else that I said that Bernie did not say. We're going a little bit more here. He goes on to say the suggestion would be leaders of the left should abandon the Democratic Party picks at a political scab that has never fully healed. Mr. Sanders, 83, a longtime independent, has had a tense yet codependent relationship with the party for decades. While he never accepted the Democratic label for himself, he is the member of the Senate Democratic Caucus and has run under the party brand when it was politically expedient, including his 2 bids for its presidential nomination. So let's talk about this. If you're just joining, Bernie Sanders is now saying that people should run outside of the Democratic Party as an independent. But there is a catch. Notice he says independent. Notice he does not say third party. And it was Hassan Piker who interviewed him recently while he was at one of these rallies. And Hassan Piker is the one who brings up, what about third party? And I want you to hear what Bernie Sanders says. This tells a lot, ladies and gentlemen. Shout out to the ever so wonderful and awesome Case Study QB for these clips. Let's dive in.
You've talked recently with the New York Times about what the future of the Democratic Party looks like and what maybe young enterprising individuals must do. And I believe I'm paraphrasing here, you said something along the lines of like running as an independent rather than utilizing the party.
For me, that's not a very radical concept because I am the longest serving independent in American congressional history, and I've always run as an independent. Look, I think the Democrats over the years deserve credit for the work they've done on women's rights, on gay rights, on civil rights in general, fighting bigotry. They deserve credit, and they've made progress. But I don't think anybody with a straight face can tell you that they've stood up for the working class of this country. And I think that's why so many working class people have drifted into the Republican Party, not because they believe in tax breaks for billionaires or they don't believe that climate change is real. It's they look at the Democrats and there's not much there. So what my view is people should think about running as they want, progressive independents. should run as progressive Democrats, but don't necessarily feel that you have to run within the Democratic Party. And I think as you may recall, in Nebraska, a fellow named Dan Osborne ran a really, really powerful campaign as an independent, running as a very proud trade unionist, running on economic issues, and he did extremely well, much better than anyone had anticipated.
So he's talking about Dan Osborne, who I covered as well on the show. He ran as an independent in Nebraska, and he almost won. He was running against a Republican. And like I said, at one point he was leading in that poll. And then, of course, the incumbent started to catch up and did win. But it was very, very close. And I think he did a great job. He was, he's pro-worker, union dude. I wouldn't call him left, but he does support some left policies. And one of the great things that Dan Osborne said is that if he were to win, he wasn't going to caucus with the Democrats or the Republicans. He was going to operate as an independent. So he didn't win, but he did come very close. That's important that I say that, because hold on to that just a second.
That was my point, and I think it makes sense.
Do you feel like there's any sort of momentum to break through the duopoly in this structure as someone who has run as an independent?
It is. It's a long discussion. If you're asking me, do I think we could start a third party tomorrow? I don't, for a lot of reasons, having to do with restrictions in various states making it almost impossible.
Pause. Does everybody see how his demeanor changed there? Let's go back a little bit, right? Just a little bit. Watch how his demeanor changes when Hassan mentions breaking the duopoly. Because see, this is the important moment.
Better than anyone had anticipated. So that was my point, and I think it makes sense.
Do you feel like there's any sort of momentum to break through the duopoly in this structure as someone who has run as an independent?
It is. It's a long discussion. If you're asking me, do I think we could start a third party tomorrow? I don't, for a lot of reasons, having to do with restrictions in various states making it almost impossible. But I think what you're seeing is massive discontent with both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. More and more people are looking for, I think, independent alternatives.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
All right.
And now we got to go. So I want you to think about what Bernie just said. He said, no, it sounded a little nervous when Hassan mentioned breaking the duopoly. And he's like, no, I think it's virtually impossible for third parties, right? But here's the thing that Bernie's not mentioning. Independent candidates have just as hard of a time as third party candidates, sometimes even harder because they have to raise even more money. It's harder for them to get more money than for third party candidates. And I'll give an example. Bless his heart, Dr. West, I still rock with you. I still think Dr. West, a great person. I've learned so much from him. But the reality is, when Dr. West left the Green Party, it became even more difficult for him to get ballot access as an independent than if he would have stayed with the Green Party. And the reason why I say that is because the Green Party already has the infrastructure established to fight back against the lawsuits, because they've gone through this so many times before, and they're able to get more ballot access, which is exactly what happened. That's why Jill was on more ballots than Dr. West. I can also point to that example with someone like RFK. RFK wasn't running through the Green Party, but when RFK decided to run as an independent, even with all the money that he had struggled. Him and Nicole said they struggled to fight back against all of these lawsuits that they were getting left and right. A lot of the money is eaten up by those lawsuits just to get on the ballot in those states. And that's why RFK had suspended his campaign as an independent. So independent candidates and third party candidates have the same struggle, where both of them have to deal with the lawsuits. They have to have the money to fight back against that, etc. Right? But there is a difference. And I want to say something here. I support both. I support people running as an independent. I support people running as third party. But Bernie Sanders does not want to start a third party, and he doesn't want to work with third parties. This is very clear. A couple years ago, Jesse Ventura came onto the show, and Jesse Ventura made it very clear to me that he approached Bernie Sanders when he announced he was running for president against Hillary Clinton in 2016. And he asked him then, if you lose to Senator Clinton, will you be willing to start a third party movement with me? And he said back then, Bernie said no. So Bernie said no. And he went on to say, I will support Hillary Clinton. Now, if I had known that, I wouldn't have donated money to Bernie Sanders. He had already made that decision that he was not going to try to do anything else. He was going to back the party regardless. Shama Sawant and Chris Hedges approached Bernie Sanders and asked him if he would be willing to start a third party movement. And he said no. The time for Bernie to do that was in 2016 after the Democratic Party, the DNC in particular, screwed him over and removed states that he won and gave them to Hillary Clinton at the convention. That was really the time to do that and to push forward with a third party movement. So let me explain to you why he's against the third party avenue, but he's okay with the independents. If we look at the Senate and we look at those independent senators like Bernie Sanders and Angus King, they're both independent, but they caucus with the two-party system. So when Hassan said, what about breaking the duopoly? What I want you to understand is that Bernie doesn't want to do that. Ding, 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 ding. A number of people heard this message and they were so excited. They're all on X and they're saying, yay, Bernie wants people to run as independents. This is awesome. This is great. He finally gets it. But they missed the part that he said about third parties. Because if you're an independent in Congress, 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to end up caucusing with one of the other parties. Bernie and Angus King usually caucus with the Democratic Party. So you're not breaking the duopoly, which is what he's not trying to do. Another part about this, third parties would actually be a real opposition to both parties. And Bernie Sanders isn't looking for a real opposition. He's looking for a friend. He's looking for someone that is going to go along with him, with the Democratic Party, but just claim the independent status. Like Bernie says he's independent, but he doesn't use that to hold up any type of legislation that would benefit progressivism. He's not doing those things. He goes along with Dem leadership as well. So Bernie doesn't support a third party. In my opinion, Bernie doesn't support third parties, not just because of the difficulty that third parties have, because independents also have those same difficulties. He doesn't support it because if you get a couple of members in Congress that are part of a third party, you now have a real opposition. And he doesn't want that. That's what people have to get through their heads. I want you to see this here. This clip with Jordan Sheraton and Breonna Joy Gray, they bring up this very interesting thing. Listen to this.
I don't think the answer here, as horrible as what Trump and Musk are doing, and it's horrible, I think it's way more corrupt than even the day-to-day corruption, dime a dozen corruption under the Democrats. But with that said, I don't think the answer is let's just get back to normal. We got to get rid of these people and let's get Pete Buttigieg in there to restore sanity. No, we've done that. And that cycle just leads to a fascist in 4 years because you bring back the normie corporatist Dem, they give the masses crumbs and people get angry again. And we have these boom bust economic cycles. So I think right now, and, with the Bernie tour, it's great. But I personally think what better opportunity to be talking about and advocating for a new party, a third party, when you have Republicans out there turning against Republican congressmen. I mean, these are like rock-ribbed conservatives at some of these town halls that are speaking out against Medicaid cuts, Social Security cuts, laying off of government workers. They are not lockstep with Musk, Trump, or any of this. And on the other end, you got normie Democrats speaking out that you folks are spineless, you're not fighting hard enough. I think Tim Walz, there's some, things I would that I would take issue with, but he's coming out saying, yeah, no, this is not a time to be talking about strengthening Obamacare. People are not going to stand for that. We need Medicare for all.
Look, I hear the thing out there is that when we get back, which we'll fight. I'll tell you what people are going to expect is they're not going to expect us to tinkle around the edge with the ACA. They're going to expect universal health care. And if there's a lesson here, I always said this, we had a 1-vote majority in Minnesota when we moved clean energy, we moved reproductive rights, we moved a whole slew of progressive, very popular, including things around guns and gun safety, very popular things. We moved it with a 1-vote majority. And people ask, well, what do you call a 1-vote majority? A majority. Simple as that.
So to me, I'm glad to see both on the right and the more liberal side, people are fed up. But what happens tomorrow if, fingers crossed, the Supreme Court actually does the right thing and says Doge is illegal? All of this was illegal. We need to reinstate with back pay these workers, and kind of this urgent crisis point ends. Or if the answer can't be all of these people out protesting, the normie Dems, the Republicans go back to sleep and are okay with the dime a dozen corruption in this country.
That part. See, that's important. If you guys haven't seen that interview, make sure you check that out. That was a really good interview. They don't just talk about that. They were also talking about like water rights. But I think that's the part that people really need to hear, because like I said, Bernie doesn't want a third party, right? Like you don't hear Bernie Sanders mention Jill Stein or anything like that. People need to understand that Bernie and AOC exist to prevent that. This is what I was trying to tell people before. This is a facade, right? Like, it's like if we're in the desert and you think you see water that's just constantly running down a waterfall in front of you, it's not real, it's a mirage, but you think you see a waterfall. And I think that's how people are viewing this with Bernie and AOC. And I know some of my like haters are going to be like, you just don't like Bernie and AOC. You're just trying to help the right. You can't give them credit for anything. No, I can see the forest through the trees. I can see the forest through the trees, and I want other people to see it too. If you see this on World Socialist website, they mention this as well. This is important. Sanders takes his fraudulent fight oligarchy show on the road. And I want to show you something they said here. This is a big sign, I thought, that really should have alarmed people. Promoted by the Democratic Party media. True to form, Sanders' tour has been heavily promoted by the Democratic Party aligned press. That includes the New York Times, The Guardian, Jacobin, and not just them, but also MSNBC, CNN. They've all been talking about it, saying, oh, maybe this is a good idea. That is your big sign. When have you ever seen corporate media to get on the side of what Bernie was saying? They usually don't. So that in itself should have given you reason to pause. If the establishment is for it, it's probably not as progressive as you think. Something to think about, people. So I'm not here to say you shouldn't fight back against the oligarchy, but the oligarchy exists in both parties. So you can't tell people fight back against the oligarchy, but please support the Democrats so you don't get Donald Trump, even though I know they just took money from billionaires. And despite what Bernie is saying, that is the reality of what is going to happen. Despite what Bernie is saying now, come 2028, when the Democratic Party decides to nominate another corporate establishment shill, Bernie Sanders will be right there in lockstep on corporate media to tell you that he endorses that candidate and that you should support them so you don't get another Trump-like figure. So this is a mirage. And I think people need to call it out for what it really is. So when I said, again, shout out to Cat Williams, all lies will be exposed. This is one of those examples. This is not real. And I don't mean to get people down, but a lot of people are getting excited about this. And they're like, yeah, he said people should run as independent. Woohoo. But he also said he's not supporting third parties. No, you shouldn't do third party. Don't you think that's a little strange? You don't hear me say one or the other. You hear me say both. You should do third party. You should do independent. Why would I exclude one of those if you're trying to really break the duopoly? But he's not really trying to break the duopoly. All lies will be exposed. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.